Good afternoon, good evening. Hello everyone, my name is Bero Beyer. I'm Festival Director of International Film Festival Rotterdam. Hello everybody on Facebook who's watching this. It's the end of a beautiful series. As you can have seen, we've had some amazing guests come to us, talk to what it means to make films nowadays, talk about their mistakes, about their challenges, their acting, directing careers. And we couldn't have hoped for, or feared even, a more fitting end. Because if you have watched the news, read some of the papers, you will find that the film, which is actually going to be our closing film tonight, which we thought would deserve a happy film, a comedy, a satire, is acutely relevant, acutely in the spotlight, because it does that, what we as a festival always pride ourselves in trying to support. So we shouldn't pride ourselves in supporting, but we do our best. Because it challenges the dominant view, because it challenges that what the authorities say or want. And sometimes that's hurtful, sometimes that results in what happened just yesterday, that a theater in Moscow that went ahead and screened the film amidst the protests that had arisen against it was basically closed down and not allowed to show the film anymore. There'll be discussions about that, I'm sure, but hopefully also about those elements which are so vivid in the film. To try and find a way to grasp with sometimes horrible events, sometimes horrible personalities even, to try and find out where the human thread of civilization has brought us, and to bring to life those stories that may have been hidden away or forgotten, because that too is what cinema can do. And to discuss that, we asked renowned film critic from The Guardian, Mr. Peter Bradshaw, and please give a very warm round of applause for the director of The Death of Stalin, Armando Iannucci.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, my name is Peter Bradshaw. I am the chief film critic of The Guardian in London. And this, of course, is the big talk. And as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't get bigger than this. When we were coming out of the airport just now, a very surreal and weird thing happened. We were coming out into the arrivals hall, and the airport played, apparently in our honor, or your honor, the Soviet national anthem.
That's right. Yes. It was weird, and we were outdoors.
Yes.
And so it was coming out of speakers.
Yes.
As we went to our car.
Yes.
So thank you to the festival
so,
for...
Yes, and thank you to Mr. Putin for laying that on.
That's right.
It's very sporting, very decent of him to have been so kind. As I understand it, however, through one of those queasy ironies which we all savor, this is in fact the 75th anniversary of the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, which this film coincides with, shall we say, and it lends a certain piquant quality, a certain historical dimension to what we're talking about now.
Yes.
It is a wonderful film. It's a brilliant film. I don't want to talk about it in that sort of gushingly critical way, because you're probably all going to go and see it later this evening, if indeed you all haven't already done so. What I'd like to do is play in a clip from the movie. In fact, it's the trailer from the movie, just to give us a taste, an amuse-bouche. So could we play in the first clip, please, the trailer from The Death of Stalin?
Should we investigate? Should you shut the fuck up before you get us both killed?
Stalin's dead. He's dead.
Stalin is dead!
Oh my God.
Our general secretary is lying in a puddle of indignity.
Yeah, he's feeling unwell, clearly.
I want to make a speech at my father's funeral.
No problem.
Technically, yes, but practically.
When I said no problem, what I meant was
No. Problem. Ignore me.
Stalin would have wanted the committee as one.
All those in favor? Carried unanimously.
We need change.
Well, let's see who can mobilize first. Oh, seems to be me.
Sneaky little shit.
The race has started. We need to start putting together a plan.
How can you run and plot at the same time?
I have no idea what is going on.
I'm the peacemaker, and I'll fuck up anyone who gets in my way. Come on! Craig, better, you flattering fannies! Get it! Give it! Hit it!
Shoot her before him, but make sure he sees it. Kill him, dump him in the pulpit. And I'll leave the rest up to you.
We have to act. I really need your help.
I'm going to have to report this conversation. Threatening to do harm or obstruct any member of the Presidium in the process of looking at your fucking face. I took Germany. I think I can take a flesh lump in a waistcoat.
No matter what happens, I will never let any harm come to you.
I may as well just shoot myself like mother.
Jesus Christ. Did Coco Chanel take a shit on your head? No, he did not.
Stalin will be loving this. I'll take it from here. Good luck, ladies.
You know, all of you can kiss my Russian ass.
Don't worry, nobody's gonna get killed, I promise you.
Thank you.
So, Amanda, can you tell me, how did this movie come along? What made you think, I know, I'm going to make a film about the death of Stalin?
Yes. And it's a comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. With the words death and Stalin.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And not only shall we make the film, we'll try and sell it.
Yes,
to
exactly.
a comedy. It's a sort of... either I was going to make it or Pixar were going to make it.
Yes, exactly.
So I thought, well, I'll make... No, well, several things happened at once. Strangely enough, I'd been thinking, I'd just finished doing Veep in America, which is set in the White House, and I thought what I really was thinking of doing was doing a comedy about a dictator, about a fictional contemporary dictator. I hadn't decided whether it was in Britain or America, but it was prompted by, you know, things happening around Europe and in elections, maverick leaders being elected, you know, strong men being elected and having elections where they're given more power. And, you know, in Turkey, they had a referendum to give the president more power. There's Putin's example. There's Berlusconi in Italy, nationalist right-wing movements across Europe. So
Orban in Hungary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. And so I was thinking something interesting is happening, something slightly frightening is happening. Look at dictators. Now, simultaneously with that, I was sent this graphic novel, a French graphic novel called The Death of Stalin, by a French production company, Quad, who produced the film. And they said, look, we want to make this film. We think it might be something you'd be interested in. And I read it, and I thought, well, yeah, this is it. This is the story, because why make a fiction? This is true. It's absurd, it's terrifying, it's farcical, it's horrific, and it's true. And a lot of the film is true. That's the thing. It's, I mean, obviously our dialogue is our dialogue, and we've got great comic actors, but the events within it are more or less happened. I mean, the rule I give is if you see something on the screen and you think, oh, yes, I can believe that, then we made it up. But if you see something on the screen where you think, oh my God, there's no way on God's earth that happened, then it is true. That's the rule, really. So that's how I... and I thought at the time it would be a kind of, you know, whimsical warning of what happened in the past, and surely this wouldn't happen again. This was before Trump was elected. We made the film, and since it's come out, people have seen certain parallels there. So I think it's now more a kind of case of we cannot let this happen again anywhere.
What is your reaction then? You see, there are so many interesting things, quite apart from its its manifest success as a drama and as a comedy. What it also does is challenge us to say, what does satire do, and how is it testing the perimeter boundaries of thinkability and tact and good taste and all the rest of it, which is what satire should be doing, because if it's not doing that, then it's not doing anything at all. And one of the things is, amazingly, this has become a kind of almost a film maudit in Russia. And that it's one of the very rare examples of a film which actually gets an old-fashioned hobnail boots banning from the Russian state. Now, the director alluded to this in his introduction. Could we flash up some of the headlines? That we've got some JPEGs of the headlines from the New York Times and the Guardian. That's the New York Times. In Russia, the death of Stalin is no laughing matter. And there it is in Cyrillic. And that's the actual old-fashioned police with, I think, machine pistols coming in.
Yes, armed.
Armed.
They wandered in with weapons and just said, we're here to find out what film you're showing. And they went, it's the death of Stalin. And they went, okay. And then they left. That was the armed police. And it's just bizarre because, yes, you're absolutely right. And censorship is banned under the Russian constitution. It's illegal to censor. And the Russian Filmmakers Union are now taking the Ministry of Culture to court for censorship. So, and it sounds like we're back in the 1950s. And the comedy of course, banning a film and therefore making it the most famous film in Russia at the moment.
Yes.
Now that everyone wants to see,
yes,
and which no doubt everyone is illegally downloading somewhere.
Yes.
So is being watched.
It strikes me as incredible that Vladimir Putin, who is being revered or hated as a kind of Ernst Stavro Blofeld figure of in infinite subtlety and cunning, as somebody who is not suppressing this film by sabotaging the servers or anything like that, so that the digital copies can't reach the cinemas. He appears to be allowing, let us say, police officers, uniformed police officers with sidearms and police and machine pistols to come into cinema foyers in the most bizarre way. I haven't seen, I can't remember anything like this in my lifetime, really.
Well, I mean, he's very good at judo, and judo is all about, so whether this is all part of a crafty move, that's true. He's still too, you know, he's got his shirt off now because there's an election coming up, so he's getting ready for
he's getting very homoerotic.
He's very kind of,
on your
no,
ass.
and they said, the Minister of Culture said it was some part of a Western plot to interfere in the Russian elections. And I know that Putin himself would disapprove of any country interfering in the elections of another country.
Yes.
So I can understand that kind of slight. But the interesting thing, that cinema did show it for a couple of days. So audiences went, Moscow Times went and did a great review of the film. And the people in the audience applauded at the end and said, look, this is fine. It's not insulting the people, because one thing I said right at the start of filming is we have to be very respectful of what happened to the people in Russia at the time. The shootings, the imprisonment, the torture, the exile to the gulags. And we see that in the film, and it's no laughing matter. We're not laughing at that. We just let it play, and we don't try and hide it. And the comedy is really what goes on indoors. Inside is what the politicians are doing. And then the effects of what the politicians are doing, we then see happen to the people outside. So, and in fact, because the ban only happened 2 days before the release, we'd already done the marketing for the film. We'd had the Russian press do screenings a month before, and I'd done a whole couple of days of Russian press interviews. They all said how accurate the film was. Yeah. And the word was that they all applauded when Stalin fell over. So, so there's some mixed feelings in the moment.
I think as I understand it, in the Russian state at the moment, even though the old communist regime would appear to be the diametric opposite to what Russian nationalists believe now, they have a profound atavistic admiration for the vozhd, as they say, the hard man. And that's why Vladimir Putin invested so much money in refurbishing Lenin's tomb, for example, all those things. And of course, Stalin.
Stalin, but also the strong leader. I mean, there is now a statue of Tsar Nicholas II.
Yes,
up in
exactly.
Moscow.
There's no difference.
It doesn't matter which kind of part of the political spectrum you're on. It's just that idea of the strong, central,
powerful
leader. And that's the type of politician that Donald Trump admires as well.
Yeah.
He's absolutely fascinated by, Kim Jong, whatever, in North Korea. Putin, obviously, shirt on or off. Trump is very much adores him. The president of the Philippines, who's a bit of a thug.
Oh, yes. Rodrigo Duterte. Duterte Harry.
Duterte Harry.
Duterte Harry.
And that, for me, is the scary thing. This idea that, we think if we have a democracy that we're fine. That actually it's all taken care of. Once you arrive at a state of democracy, you've arrived at perfection and it's permanent and it doesn't alter. And that's not true. Democracy has to be cared for and cultivated and nurtured like a plant. You have to keep watering it. Every election you have to be ultra careful that democracy isn't being toyed with or abused. And that's the general feeling that I'm getting at the moment across Europe and now in America, that there are certain types of people being elected who actually see democracy as slightly annoying.
Yeah.
And also see opposition as a little bit criminal and opponents as enemies of the people.
Yes.
And that sort of thing.
Yes. Or people that they are tolerating out of the pure statesman-like goodness of their heart.
Yes.
And that by continuing to oppose them, they are injuring this goodwill.
Well, that's right. It's the idea that opposition is unpatriotic.
Yes. Yes,
yes.
And we see it in Britain as well. If you oppose Brexit, you are terribly unpatriotic.
That's right,
example.
yeah. And in America, see, Stalin used this phrase, enemy of the people, to describe his opponents. And then when Khrushchev took over, he actually banned the use of the phrase, enemy of the people, because it was Stalin. So the actual phrase that was all about criticizing those who had an opposing view was in itself banned.
Yes.
And then 2 days after Trump's inauguration, he tweets that that CNN and NBC are the real enemies of the people. Not realizing, I know he reads a lot of historic books. He hadn't not realized, but they're all American, and there's economics and stuff. There's, I mean, his reading list is he's the biggest reader. He's so ready. Yeah. I'm the readiest.
He's the readiest.
I so read. Yeah. You wouldn't believe how ready I am. Yeah. Words. I have such words. The wordiness of my mouth is beyond. You wouldn't believe. A lot of people have talked about it. A lot of people have said, you read, God, you read. Where is he? He's reading. He's going to be late. He's writing a novel. He's making history, and he's writing it and researching it at the same time, and he's inventing it. He can invent history. That's how good I am. I can actually invent history. So what was I saying? No,
I can't remember.
I can't remember. No. So he was unaware of the kind of historic kind of implications of he will at some point say work sets you free and not know what he's talking about.
Yes. Well, that already there are American conservative journalists who use that phrase and think it's a great phrase and it should be detached from its historical context because it does make.
I was reading this. I was reading the Wolf book, the Fire and Fury book, and there's some very alt-right, very right-wing. It doesn't call himself a racist. It calls himself a racialist, as if it's some sort of valid philosophy. And he said something like, he tweeted something like, when Trump is elected, we're going to party like it's 1933. Which, so anyway, your next question.
Yes, well, I was going to say, I should say, I mean, this is a tiny anecdote, but about being jiu-jitsued by Vladimir Putin. In fact, I should say that he does take an interest in filmmakers as a matter of interest. He took Andrei Zvagintsev, the director of Loveless, out for tea. He invited him for tea at the Kremlin 10 years ago when The Return came out, because he was very, very overexcited. And I don't know if any of you know this, but Zvagintsev used to be Vladimir's favorite filmmaker before their bromance went very sour. But so it's not unusual. He may invite you out for tea, Amanda, and if he does, you've got to be very careful.
Yes.
Don't give him anything. Don't say anything to him.
Or don't drink anything either.
If he offers you a vitamin shot.
But that was the other thing that was so 1950s about this banning, in that there was a letter was signed by various prominent artists, including the director of Burnt by the Sun, which is a fantastic film about life under Stalin, and who said that the film had no artistic merit whatsoever, and that was part of the reason for banning. So it was a sort of quality control. It was almost like, you know, you don't have to go through the pain of seeing the film and enduring the complete absence of artistic merit, because we've done that for you. And that was kind of sad, I felt, that, you know, that filmmakers should be harnessed in that kind of way.
I wanted to talk about another kind of, I don't want to talk about Death of Stalin all the time, but there is another kind of slightly more insidious censorship, or quasi-censorship, I encountered when I was writing about the movie in the UK. I had the mildest and most gentlemanly difference of opinions with the conservative columnist Peter Hitchens of the Mail on Sunday, a newspaper you may probably not aware of. But if you are, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Is that he wrote a furious article saying, "Oh, I've just been seeing this disgraceful film. Only the dinner party, Guardian reading classes would have approved of this film. Nobody would ever dare make a film about Hitler like this. None of you." And in which case, about 1 million people said, "But what about the YouTube downfall spoofs?
Yes.
What about Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator?
Yes.
What about Mel Brooks's The Producers?
Yes.
What about Ernst Lubitsch, To Be or Not to Be? What about Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, which features a whole scene of Adolf Hitler being killed?" And he just said, each and every one of those instances is irrelevant.
Yes.
That's irrelevant. Will you please shut up? So there's this strange thing happening in the UK where certain people on the right, they are absolutely on sort of DEFCON 1, and this is against a type of people who are, to revive another great Leninist phrase, useful idiots. They're very, very quick, lightning quick, to accuse anybody of being a useful idiot.
And also, he claimed that it was a left-wing film because I was making Stalin the subject of comedy and therefore not attacking him.
Yes.
Which you can't do in comedy.
No.
Because comedy's not at all about undermining anyone or ridiculing them or subverting. That's all in drama.
Yes.
That all happens in drama. Comedy's an entertainment where everything is fine.
Yes.
And everything is presented as normal. But I stayed out of that dispute.
I saw, yes. I mean, I sort of stayed in it in the most gentlemanly way. In the most gentlemanly way, I pointed out that there is, in fact, a Russian literary tradition doing exactly the same thing. At the time, the only thing that was keeping hope alive was satire and comedy, actually at the time within Russia.
Within Russia, in the 1940s and 50s, there were Stalinist joke books. There were jokes about Stalin and about Beria and about shootings and rape by soldiers on prisoners and on the security services on prisoners. And you could be killed if you were caught in possession of one of these joke books or if you told one of these jokes. And yet people felt the need to make comedy out of it because it was a way of saying, look, you can take my family away, you can take my livelihood away, you can lock me up, but if I can still make a joke about you, you haven't touched here at all.
No.
And that for me is part of why you make comedy about public figures and comedy arises. partly out of enjoyment, and you make fun of things you like, actually, especially when you start off as a comedian. What you write about is this the stuff that you really, you know, so if I'm an avid TV watcher, the first thing I'll do is be like a TV parody or something like that, you know, and I'll parody some of the shows that I really like. But also comedy can arise out of anger and frustration, and it may be you have anger and frustration, but you can't quite articulate it in a kind of polemic way or a journalistic way. But if you can make a kind of fiction that is funny because it's sort of processing that anger and kind of showing you why you're angry, then I think that's very healthy, and I think that's why a lot of satire is there, really.
Right. I want to get back to talking about your earlier career. I mean, we were talking about, unfortunately we can't show it to you. Armando, as you probably know, started as a satirist, a producer and writer in a number of BBC shows, like On the Hour. You made Alan Partridge shows. He had his own show, but you progressed from that to again, another kind of groundbreaking political satire, which was The Thick of It, which is a satire in a way of the, I think of it as a satire of the late 90s, early 2000 era in Britain, of a kind of centrist, technocratic, almost avowedly apolitical Labour government, which believed that it had gone, as you said, had gone beyond politics, gone beyond ideology, beyond the purely and vulgarly partisan, and its obvious transcendent rightness and naturalness in government is what made that breed of politician so infuriatingly smug. Exasperating, enragingly smug is what, in a way, what turned everybody off it. What you did, some people will know it, some people won't. The TV show was called The Thick of It, which was single camera, handheld, a kind of comedy, a kind of TV, which was, as it said, in the thick of it. It was put you right inside it.
You should feel like you were eavesdropping on something you weren't allowed to see.
Yes,
and that you were seeing in this particular instance,
And this morphed into a terrific movie called In the Loop, a title which alludes, I think I'm right in saying, to a statement made by George H.W. Bush Sr., where he claimed not to have been in the loop when he was talking about what we were doing in the first Gulf War. I think he said he was not in the loop, which is quite something, considering he was a former president and a former director of the CIA.
And commander-in-chief.
Yes.
Of the forces in the Gulf.
Yes. Remarkable achievement. I'd like now to play a clip from this. This is from the movie, I think 2009, the movie In the Loop. So let's go.
I'm Judy, by the way, Judy Malloy, Director of Communications for International Development.
Yes, this is a normal morning, isn't it?
The Minister was rubbish on last night's interview, so...
He was rubbish?
Yes, rubbish.
Come on, Malcolm, he asked me for a personal opinion.
But why didn't you say? I mean, he asked you, fuck, of course that explains it. See if he'd asked you to fucking black up, or to give him your PIN number, or to shit yourself. Would you have done that as well?
I would have blacked up, because it was radio, nobody would have known.
Very good, yeah.
But war is basically unforeseeable, isn't it?
That is not our line. Walk the fucking line. Look, we've got Karen Clark over from Washington today.
Okay.
We've got enough fucking Pentagon goons here to stage a fucking coup d'etat.
Minister,
not the time, love. I'm busy. Fuck off.
This is Toby.
Toby, hi. Glad you could make it. It's a bit of an odd morning here.
Yes.
Welcome to the madhouse. I apologise for Malcolm.
Don't apologise for me. Apologise for yourself. Did I not just tell you to fuck off and yet you're still here?
It's true, I am, yes, still here.
Hi. Fetus boy, lesson 1. I tell you to fuck off, what do?
F off?
You'll go far. Well, fuck off.
Right.
Judy and I were thinking that I could row back on Question Time tonight.
You're not going on Question Time tonight. You've been disinvited.
We've been prepping Question Time.
Why wasn't I told about this?
Why the fuck would I tell you about it? I've told you to fuck off twice and yet you're still here.
You should tell me about it because it's a scheduled media appearance by this department's Secretary of State, so therefore it falls well within my purview.
Within your purview?
Yes.
Where do you think you are? In some fucking Regency costume drama? This is a government department, not a fucking Jane fucking Austen novel.
Malcolm.
Allow me to pop a jaunty little bonnet on your purview and ram out of the shitter with a lubricated horse cock.
Your swearing does not impress me. My husband works for Tower Hamlets, and believe me, those kids make you sound like Angela Lansbury.
She's married.
It's a while since I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah.
That's all about the Gulf War, by the way.
Yeah.
It's all a metaphor.
The great thing, the very refreshing thing I think about watching that again is part of the, as it were, the satirical impact. I'll say satirical, I could mean comic or dramatic or just impact, is how people talk in public and how people talk in private. Because in those days, we were used to the gentle, almost soporific emollient tones of Tony Blair. And those were, he was the sort of good cop, and behind them were the bad cops who were...
Yeah, I mean, that's what I found out making the thick of it, because I do a lot of research in advance, and we talk to the people who either are in power, were in power, whether they're very senior or ministers, or more interesting are always the ones 2 or 3 rungs down who really tell you how it works and so on. And it is that sense of, you're right, you described it as very centrist. I mean, the Blair government and Brown and you know, under Cameron as well, it was all part of a thing of politics narrowing itself down to just look at the key 100,000 people in any election upon whom the election depends. You know, the marginal, the swing voters, and therefore all the parties taking for granted, you know, 90% of the electorate, because everyone is homing in on this 10%. So it was all about being cautious and not saying too much and being bland and being like a kind of medium-ranking business person rather than a politician. And therefore, as you say, nothing untroubling being said on screen. And yet going behind the scenes, there's very media-obsessed, this trying to, you know, make the headlines happen, to drive the news, and then to respond to any bad headline by bullying news people and journalists. And it's a very testosterone-fueled, very macho kind of male world of swearing and shouting, and every event is like the most important crisis. And what was funny for me is it just didn't work. That actually, no matter how many people aspire in politics to be like Malcolm Tucker, I have to remind them in every episode of The Thick of It, it gets worse when Malcolm gets involved.
Yes.
What was a small, you know, issue is something that Malcolm then says, right, we've got to ring up the Daily Mail and tell them to fuck out, and it so becomes a big headline.
Yes.
And then it becomes out of control, and then Malcolm runs away and wants the minister to deal with it because he, you know, it's gone beyond. And that's it. I remember when we were researching for Veep, and I met this guy who became Jonah. I don't know if you know Veep, but there's a guy, Jonah, in Veep, who's the worst character. You know, when you go to America, and whenever I was going around meeting sort of congressional figures or something, people would introduce themselves by the names of one of the characters in the show. So someone would go, hello, I'm the Dan of the senator's office, or I'm the Amy of the senator's office. No one would say, I'm the Jonah of the... But they would all say, that's the Jonah over there. You know, everyone knew a Jonah, but they weren't the Jonah. Well, we met the Jonah. We met the guy who inspired Jonah eventually. And he was like, he worked in the West Wing, and he was frantic and, you know, pent up and, you know, and was doing the most important job in the world. And even his emails were stressful. They were like full of exclamation marks. And it was like, well, I can give you 30 minutes, but, you know, I am in the West Wing and it's a busy day today. And he worked in the digital, you know, the Twitter account of some, you know, part of the West. You know, he was so minor, but it was like, and he turned up for lunch. And it turned out he was smoking and he was shaking. He had a very red face. And he had a beer for lunch. That was his lunch. and he gave us 30 minutes, but always checking his watch. And then he ran out and lit up another cigarette and ran off. And I just love that idea of that kind of, you know, behind these walls that look imposing, look like everyone knows what they're doing. There are these people who are, you know, having their own little personal drama. And like someone of him, he did say that he got off on ringing up people going, hello, I'm calling from the West Wing. And hearing on the other end of the line people going, it's the West Wing. and he did say to me, you know, I used to date 6s and 7s, but since I've been working in the West Wing, I'm now dating 8s and 9s. You know, and it's just...
And of course, Donald Trump speaks like that all the time.
Absolutely.
He's going to marry his 8s and 9s.
Yes, that's the number of people that he dates. And there's that, and the other thing I found is this in awe of the media. That's the thing. When we were shown around the actual West Wing, which is a very cramped, tiny corridors, but full of like 50-year-old 4-star generals sitting in a corridor on a chair with a laptop.
Yes.
Because they say that's their office, because they want to say to everyone they work in the West Wing, even though they could have an enormous suite of rooms somewhere else in Washington. Reggie Love, who was Obama's kind of assistant, showed us around the West Wing, and he would reference the TV show The West Wing.
Yes.
So he would say, this is the Eisenhower room, this is the Roosevelt room, this would be where CJ and Josh would sit, and I'm saying, but you are him. You are this is real. You're really in this. Why don't you say this is where Angela Merkel would meet with Barack Obama? You know, it's much more impressive to say that.
Yes.
So there is this. I think there is that idea that they live in a world that we're not interested in, and that the fictional versions of themselves is more interesting.
And isn't it sad that nobody says that in Britain? Nobody says this. I'm calling from Downing Street. That isn't the same thing. Who cares if you're calling from Downing Street? All these people in Downing Street, they're almost having to shout and scream and bully to make up for the fact that they're only working in stupid old Britain, as opposed to the glamorous world of the United States.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what drove Tony Blair mad. Was the first time he went to America and thought, why can't I be like that? Why can't I have motorcycle outriders and an office?
Well, that's what In the Loop is about, is when the Brits go to Washington.
Yeah.
And I read this, you know, after the Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq, the second Gulf War, that the Brits were starstruck by being in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
That our foreign secretary was going, hey, we're in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
You're the foreign fucking secretary.
His office is loads bigger. His office, the foreign secretary's office, is twice as big
you're
as
the
the
successor
Oval Office.
to Castlereagh.
Yeah.
You know,
And
stop it.
The Duke of Wellington.
And I said to the actors, remember the first time you went to LA and you were wined and dined and people said you were marvelous, you were going to have lots of meetings, and how you came home with nothing. Yeah. Just remember that. And that really kind of that really made them kind of click into it. Yeah.
Exactly. But the other thing is that really makes an impact. I wonder if you could kind of get away with it now in a way, is the sheer aggression and the misogyny. That in a way, nobody has the nerve in art, in a way now, to turn Malcolm Tucker up to 11 and have him swear directly at a woman who stands up to him, of course, and says that she's not impressed and he's just like, oh boy, don't be ridiculous. But it's so kind of shocking. Even though you know it's crazy and of course it's ridiculous and he's absurd, that's in a way very hard right about now. Actually, it's very hard.
Yeah, I think you could get away with it. I mean, what we've always been very and what's been important in all this stuff is that I don't think of the characters as female characters and male characters. I just think of them as characters, and they all have to be as equally strong or as equally frail or as equally. And you know, I enjoy the fact that the minister in the thick of it is Nicola Murray, and that the Veep, the vice president, is Selina Meyer, and that they kind of give as good as they get. But you're right, actually seeing full-blown misogyny there out of context.
Out of context, in context. I mean, it's strong stuff.
But
I mean, it's very.
Yeah, but then I kind of thought, you know, and I'm not a swearer, you know, but I thought this show, to accurately represent what does go on behind closed doors on a daily basis there, has to have lots of swearing in it. And the thing about swearing is it can get really boring if it's the same word again and again. So you then have to think of phrases that go around it. They give it a little bit more of an entertainment, you know, a factor, and make each fresh bout of swearing, you know, have something new about it, you know.
Yes.
So, and it's great fun writing for Malcolm. It's almost like a side, you know, when you've done half an hour of proper writing, you can sort of relax by doing 5 minutes of Malcolm writing, where you just, it's a kind of therapy.
I wondered, is Malcolm your Mr. Hyde? I mean, do you channel into... I mean,
I'm not like Malcolm.
Am I talking to Dr. Jekyll right now?
Yeah, through the night, in the middle of the night, I wander around London, just swearing at prostitutes.
In your top hat, in the pea soup of four.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
But there is that element, though, in writers, because, of course, Malcolm is written by, you know, there's a team of writers,
Yes,
and
of
they
course.
are all the mildest-mannered people you'd ever meet. And there is that frightening thing of
All
reading,
writers are, yes,
of meeting a writer and then reading something they've written and just go, "What did you write that?" You know, but you are just so quiet.
Yes.
And, you know,
Well, yes, it is an adage of mine that a room full of writers is a room full of Dr. Jekylls. You're not talking
That's
to
right.
real people.
Yeah.
And of course, the writers are the same talent base you drew on for Death of Stalin in Martin and David Schneider and people like them.
Yeah. And I've, you know, over the years I've worked with lots of writers, and I like to, you know, always bringing new writers in and refreshing. But I like the fact that we are a bit of a kind of repertory company of writers and performers, and that we didn't all meet at the one university or the one theatre company or something, but we've all kind of stuck together over the last 25 years in different little combinations, you know, so still doing stuff with Steve Coogan, and Chris Morris directed in Veep, and the writers have worked on Veep at Thick of It, and so on, yeah.
I want to move on. I want to play in a clip from Veep now. Everybody probably here will know about it. Amanda went on from The Thick of It and In the Loop to direct this and create and showrun this amazing multi-Emmy award-winning HBO show, Veep. Can we play in the first Veep clip now, please?
Before I let you go, I've got to ask what we're all thinking. The White House. So you're definitely not going to run again in 3 years.
I have no plans to run at this time. I'm also very busy with adult literacy.
And AIDS.
And AIDS, yes, we must never forget AIDS.
Certainly not. Very special thank you to our very special guest, President Selina Meyer.
He's a great guy.
Oh. Back to you, Jane.
Thanks, Danny. Danny Egan's been filling in as my co-host this week, and we think that he is doing a terrific job. We'll be right back with more CBS This Morning.
And we're clear.
Okay, well, we got that.
Madam President, it's so good to see you.
Oh, for goodness sake.
You let your hair grow.
Yeah.
We should have lunch now that you're back.
Good.
Thanks.
Wonderful. What is she like?
Oh, I love her.
Because I've heard she's a complete gash and a half.
Yeah, she really is.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad to hear that you're feeling better.
Oh, come on. Everything's, yes.
Gary. Dan.
So, how did I do? Somebody tell me how I did.
You were fantastic.
Literally anyone.
You were great, ma'am.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. I need my coat, and I need my purse. Can you believe this? The anniversary of the historic House vote? I feel like we're celebrating like frat house gang rape, except I didn't even get a candlelight vigil.
I love candles.
Hey, Richard, what else do we have lined up for me?
You've got interviews the rest of the day, ma'am.
Yeah, but you got to call Wilner at the Times.
Indianapolis Times, got it.
And Time Magazine. Let's get in touch with them because the world really needs to know.
About the gangbang thing?
Well, I know you.
Oh.
Hey.
How are
So?
you? Sublime.
Yeah?
Just sublime.
So you didn't think I came off to...
Insane? Not at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, good. What about when you threw the Hughes question at me about the advance? I mean,
I didn't actually watch the interview, but everybody's talking about how gorgeous you look.
Oh, good. Yeah. You want to try that new place I was telling you about?
I got a bolt, but I will catch up with you all later, though.
So, wait a minute. You're not coming back to the office?
No, I got an unofficial lunch with a potential big foreign donor for the Meyer Fund.
Oh.
That could get us into trouble down the line.
Senior Ocampo is having trouble nudging his visas through, so I called our friends over at the State Department.
That definitely will.
I look forward to seeing you in your entirety a little later.
Nice. Okay. Bye.
Adios.
Okay. Not a word. Seriously, not a word.
That, of course, relatively late on in the season when...
I can't take credit for that, because that was from the season I didn't go. Nice
okay.
to see it again.
Well, okay. Yeah, sorry, those are the only clips we had. But it was relatively late on. In fact, that's after Amanda actually stepped down. But these are the whole concept, of course. Created by you, of course. That was relatively later on. Selina Meyer has, in fact, is now out of power. She is exiled from Washington, D.C. and in New York City and trying to set up various vainglorious things for her.
There's something weird about politicians when they're no longer in power. They suddenly shrivel in front of you. They start looking, they go on like panel games and quiz shows and try doing comedy, and It's that thing of like not having the thing that has driven them since they were born is no longer there.
And the great thing about it is that she never had it in the first place.
Well,
She was vice president, and what I always thought was brilliant about Veep is that it had the inspired idea of a vice presidency, of course, which is famously a terrible job, without power, and she's literally pressing her nose up against the glass of power, but she never seems to have it. And then she gets to be president, and she's still kind of frustrated. She still doesn't know what she's doing.
And it was really inspired by reading a massive, yet-to-be-finished, written biography of Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, yes. Robert Cara's book.
Robert Caro. 3 volumes, well, 4 volumes at the moment, and he's only just, they haven't even done Vietnam yet. But what was great about that, I mean, the portrayal of Lyndon Johnson in the thing is of someone who was really powerful in the Senate Majority Leader, really, you know, would bash heads together, would really force people to compromise, would twist arms and really do deals, you know, in the way that Donald Trump likes to think he is. But this was the real thing. So the most powerful man in Washington, apart from the president, then becomes vice president under Kennedy and is literally sitting in a room tapping his fingers on the desk, wondering whether someone's going to call.
Yeah.
And I just like that kind of tragicomedy of someone who clearly is very, very talented and was powerful, reduced to this kind of mannequin, and yet, as we all know, you know, a heartbeat away from the presidency.
Yes.
And that's, I remember Joe Biden's chief of staff telling us that, who was also Al Gore's chief of staff, telling us that the thing the vice presidents have, you know, it's almost like in a land, America, where it's all about coming first. And that's it. The only important thing is coming first. Being vice president is like wandering around with a badge saying, I came second. And going into a room where everyone respects you and is very respectful of you because you're part of the office and the vice president, but knowing that people will be laughing about you as you leave, you know, and just having to put up with that because you never know.
Yes.
And also they never know. So they're also kind of laughing, but on the other hand thinking, but I mustn't cross them because you never know.
No, you never know. I mean,
so
Harry Truman got to be kind of dropped. You know,
absolutely.
FDR died, and Harry Truman dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. You never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Or Gerald Ford, who wasn't even elected as vice president.
Yes.
He was just took over from Agnew. Yeah. So that I like that. And also, and what's different in Veep, as opposed to think of it, is that we're now in a kind of level of politics that does mean something internationally.
Yes.
And every move that she makes is going to be commented on all around the country and perhaps the world. And therefore, that what she does and says is important. And you couldn't have someone like Malcolm Tucker in that scenario, because if anyone spoke like that to her, he would be wrestled to the ground and taken away, because you just cannot speak to the vice president like that. You know, it's you forget that the president is also head of state. So there's a sort of respect for the office, if not for the person.
What I found so fascinating about Veep when I watched it, I remember when I first watched, we were talking about The West Wing, Aaron Sorkin's The West Wing, which is a masterpiece.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely loved it.
I remember thinking, you know what, this is very American. Americans would never go for cynicism. I remember thinking, thinking we had Yes Minister, which was totally cynical, and they have The West Wing, which is, I mean, Aaron Sorkin is a brilliant writer, but he's one of the most uncynical, absolutely idealistic writers in a way ever.
He's an optimist.
He's a total optimist. I mean, he can be exasperating in his own way, of course, the great man, but he is totally uncynical. And if you'd have told me, if you'd have described to me Veep then, I said no. Americans would never accept Veep. They would never accept it. They would accept The West Wing, but not Veep. So what do you think happened? Was there a kind of huge appetite for rock and roll cynicism, which was not
happened
being
was, you know, Aaron Sorkin was still at the tail end. The whole American Constitution is, I'm going to get quite serious and professorial here now. The whole American Constitution is predicated on the fact that people of different opposing views would be made to compromise.
Yes.
Because what it did was it divided up power so that no one body had absolute power. So the president doesn't have absolute power because the laws have to be passed by Congress. Congress doesn't have absolute power because there are two houses and both houses have to pass it. But one house has to pass it by 60-40, so you've actually got to get a supermajority, you know, and that sort of thing. So the idea is you'd never get anything done if you just stuck to your own views all the time. So you'd have to compromise. And I think in the tail end of the Aaron Sorkin presidency, as it were, that was still happening. But then what happened is the Republicans and the Democrats have separated and have absolutely refused to cooperate with each other. Both regard each other as the enemy, and you mustn't consort with the enemy. And so what happens now in American politics is nothing happens. Nothing gets done. It's gridlock. So even now when you've got Donald Trump, you've got the Republicans in the White House and in the House and in the Senate. Even then, they can't repeal Obamacare. They can't really get through a budget. They can't do that. You know, they can get one or two things through, but nothing. They're not steamrollering in the way that Lyndon Johnson managed to get through when he was in charge of the Senate. Steamrollering Civil Rights Acts and Great Reform Acts. Can't do that anymore. And I think that is what's set in. And this disillusionment with DC has set in. And, you know, Congress has an approval rating of something like 21%. And, you know, the question that's always asked is, who are these crazy 21%? Because it's so lowly regarded. And I think that's why something like Veep has perhaps kind of struck a chord, because it has, and again, people in Washington have said it's an accurate portrayal of what is going on. But I think it struck a chord because people beyond Washington have sensed this malaise, this kind of ossification of law, and nothing is happening.
I think it's both in the Loop and Veep are about, and The Death of Stalin are about a class of people who have made politics their life and their vocation and their profession without knowing quite why.
Oh, that's right. No, yes, because the first thing I discovered doing Thick of It was just how many 21-year-olds were writing policy for ministers. And then going to Washington, how many 22, 23-year-olds, a degree in terrorism studies from Georgetown University, was suddenly being asked to write the Constitution for Iraq. There was a 24-year-old who went out to help set up the Constitution. He, you know, he didn't know how to buy a house or how to, you know, how to mend a car, but you know, go out and just tell that country how to run itself because he had a degree in it. And that's what's happening now. You're getting this sort of breed of politico that hasn't done anything outside of politics, has loved politics, has gone in, done a political degree, then become a researcher or an MP or a think tank, you know, researcher, you know, and just lives a life of politics. And the other thing you notice in Washington is even when people are out of power, they're not out of power, they're still around. You know, the people that worked under Obama are still in Washington. The people that worked under George Bush are still in Washington because there's senators that they can work for, or there are think tanks they can work, or there are lobby groups that they can work and advise for. They can work for the other side, the people who are trying to persuade the pressure groups, that are trying to persuade the lawmakers to bend the law their way. So they don't go away, and it's just this massive revolving door.
Do you think that in a way Veep preceded the kind of end game that we have, you know, I mean, that, how shall I say this? Barack Obama was never assassinated. There was never an assassination attempt. What there is was he was trolled, basically. I think basically Donald Trump was the reactionary right's way of trolling him.
He was troller in chief.
Yes, he hadn't been shot in the way that everybody was afraid that he would happen, but in a way, some people say that social media has stopped violent crime because people can get it all out on their Facebook page. In a weird way, I think Barack Obama was trolled. He was fatally trolled in the 2016 US presidential election in a way. And this was the end point of the despair and the cynicism which was engendered by precisely this kind of smugness and this kind of sclerotic political culture that you were talking about. I wondered what you thought of, how can I say this? Is there a pre-Harvey Weinstein and a post-Harvey Weinstein way of doing jokes about gang rape? Do you know what I mean?
Right,
I mean, when, you know, I watched that clip again,
and every time I wake up, that question crosses my mind.
I thought, whoa, you know, I got gang raped and I didn't even get a candlelit visual or something like that. I mean, it's great. I think it's great. We should be doing those gags because what is terrible is not quite doing them. Doing them 1,000% like that is great.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I wonder, is there a new Kulturkampf that we're worried about now? I mean, dare I say it? Dare I use that term?
Am I allowed to say I don't know? Because I think we're still in the middle of it, and we're still trying to work out how to respond to it and what our reaction to it is, and work out how long we need to kind of work through all the issues. So I honestly don't know, and I think my only practical answer is you sort of have to examine each line as it comes, you know, and as you're writing, examine whether this is a joke that might have been funny 3 years ago, but actually, is it funny now? And not that I'm advocating self-censorship, but there is part of me that wants people to laugh at the joke. And if you're writing something where you think, well, people actually won't laugh at that, I kind of think, well, what's the point of putting it in? You know what I mean? And which is not to say you should self-censor. Then you then have to think of how is there a way of approaching the subject that will make people respond to it?
Yeah.
You know, that will make people actually find themselves laughing and then thinking, oh, should I have laughed? You know, that uneasy laughter.
Yeah.
Because that's much more interesting, and that's what you're sort of trying to achieve in a way.
Yeah.
But that's something that you have to do, and each writer has to do, and one joke at a time, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the answer. I mean, I was reading this really interesting article in the New York Times a couple of days from the film critic, the A.O. Scott, who was doing his I don't know what to make of Woody Allen, because I love Woody Allen films and have done for years and years and years, and now I really genuinely don't know what to do. And I'm similar. I mean, Woody Allen is a great kind of comic hero of mine. But now I watch the films and I see all sorts of references there where I'm thinking, oh my God, it's there. It's like, you know, I happened to show Stardust Memories at the National Film Theatre in London a couple of years ago, because they asked me, you know, what's your favourite Woody Allen film? And of course I realised I hadn't watched it in about 25 years. Put it on, and it was full of references to underage sex and fathers. You know, if you weren't my daughter, I'd be dating you, kind of thing. In Trump fashion. And it was cringe-inducing, you know. And it does, and it's a puzzling and awkward time. But it's kind of right that we are going through that kind of discomfort. And you know, what I'd hate is that we do mass censorship and all of the past is consigned to history.
I think you can't. I mean, I think you can't. We were having this debate ourselves about, in The Guardian is in a very, very kind of tiresome and ridiculous thing of doing the best Oscar-winning films ever, which is a fantastically tiresome thing for us to be doing, of course. And it's
but a great read.
But irritating the shit out of everyone, and nobody's happy. But, you know, the top 10...
Have you ever done a best Oscar-winning films of all time, articles of all time?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of,
and I totally disagreed with the choice. I totally disagreed with their choice. It should have done it. But, you know, obviously, do you include Annie Hall? Now, until very recently, of course, Annie Hall should be included. And then you think to yourself, but why are we even thinking about it? Is it purely because, in fact, Annie Hall is one of the movies in which there is not many references to, in fact, he wants to go out with Annie Hall, and Annie Hall's about the right age for him. So, in fact, it's not quite a Woody Allen film in that sense. But there's another sense.
It's like saying it was fine. There was only one killing.
There was only
fine.
There's not really not
I mean,
much
compared
to But as you say, there is a kind of technical aspect. If for whatever unfair reasons you no longer find it funny, then it's a comedy, and if you no longer find it funny, then sorry, it's not doing its job.
But you know, one of my all-time favourites was the producers that you mentioned, the original producers, and I'd been so going on about the producers to my kids that we put it on. And there's a whole 20-minute sequence in it in which they're so convinced they're going to become millionaires that Zero Mostel's character, Max Bialystock, buys himself a Swedish receptionist in a bikini. Buys himself. And kind of plays with her for 20 minutes. And my daughter is just thinking, why are you showing me? This is just absolutely
and it's completely, it was invisible to me.
And of course you see it through her eyes as well. And I'm just thinking, this is awful. And why had I blocked this out from my memory of the producers? Because my memory of the producers is that shot of them singing Springtime for Hitler and the pans across the audience and all that this. Which is one of the funniest shots ever in cinema. You know? So that's my memory.
Well, yes, and when it was revived, when when Mel Brooks revived it, of course, the secretary figure was totally rewritten so that she wasn't just
Okay, right.
When it was revived on stage and then again the new movie, it's completely rewritten. She is a character. She falls in love with Leo Bloom, and so she's not just a kind of Dolly Bird figure. But it's interesting how that character was completely rewritten.
Yes. But what I'd hate is us to consign everything I don't know when the Harvey Weinstein story broke, but pre-December the 9th, 2000 and whatever, as you just wipe that whole back catalogue of films, And the other thing that does in terms of social media that I do find, and this connects really to what we were talking about right at the start about censorship, is actually we ourselves are in danger of becoming our own censors in that we now will only talk to people who agree with us. We'll only, socially engage with people. And anyone who disagrees with us will unfollow, will block, will non-platform, will say, we're in danger of saying, well, what you said there, I disagree with. And the fact that you're carrying on disagreeing with me means that I don't feel safe and I'd like you to leave, please. It's that sense of shutting down opposition through a kind of the mechanism of saying it upsets me, or it stresses me, or it offends me. And actually, I think it's good to be offended. I'm not saying that means you can say whatever you like, no matter how offensive, but I think it's good to be offended because it challenges your beliefs. And if your beliefs aren't strong enough and they cannot withstand a joke about your beliefs, then they can't be strong, And so it's a way of testing how you feel, whether you can take a joke and then be able to argue back or joke back, And I do find it worrying that we're becoming like our own little mini tyrants by banning anyone from having an opposing point of view.
Yes. I wondered what you thought about, we were talking about social media, what this phrase which has morphed in the last 12 months, fake news.
Yes.
Fake news began as a kind of satire, basically.
Yes.
People forget this, that the malicious and sinister purveyors of fake news took upon themselves the mannerisms and the prerogatives of satirists because websites like The Onion created spoof news stories, but they were obvious that they were, and they were very, very funny, they were brilliant, and they were there to get a laugh. What people did, what fake news outlets started to do, is to do hoax or pastiche news items about Hillary Clinton eating babies or being a member of a Satanist cult, circulating them and sort of saying, we're being satirists, that's a joke. And also but the joke isn't obvious and you're supposed to take it seriously.
And also the fake news was originally a term used to point out the sort of thing that the alt-right were doing, which is like these kind of crazy stories.
Yes.
They were called fake news.
And
now it's been...
Now it's completely appropriated.
Echoing Putin's judo move, Trump has... with his jacket and tie still on, has taken fake news and has turned it back on his opponents.
And that's what's so insidious, is that the way he uses fake news is not to sort of complain or contest factual inaccuracies, because he never does. He says this is fake news, and his implication is that all news is fake news. Anybody who seeks to contest his legitimacy or what he's doing, this is inauthentic.
Well, it's because
he is the president.
It's because the only real thing in Donald Trump's mind is his mind. It's anything in his head is real and true.
Yes.
Even if he thinks 500 million people turned up to this, if he thinks that, it's true.
Yes.
And anything that's outside his head is fake.
Yes.
And that's it. And you've got to, so to be part of Donald Trump's world, you've got to be in his head.
Yes.
Which is why people say it's, very often he agrees with the last person he's spoken to, because that's the memory that's in his head, really. And that's if he was listening to them. That's the other thing. And that's what it's about. So he doesn't lie in that he genuinely isn't lying if he thinks that what's in there is true. But it goes right back to the thing that prompted me to do the thick of it and In the Loop. It's something Tony Blair said when he was trying to justify, after the invasion of Iraq, and he didn't find weapons of mass destruction, and he was trying to justify it, and he said, look, knowledge isn't the same as facts. I only know what I believe. And only knowing what you believe, if you think about it, is the opposite of what people have been doing for 2,500 years, which is taking empirical evidence, facts, and then drawing a conclusion from them, believing. And he does the opposite. He arrives already with a belief, and it's that belief that influences how he interprets facts. So it's not facts first, it's belief first, and then you find the facts to fix the belief. And that is a problem I find in politics, in that people operate on this thing of if you don't share my belief, you actually don't share the truth. You're no longer speaking the truth.
Yes.
And that's the worrying thing.
Yes. It is not truthy, to use the term.
It's
not
truthy,
It
yeah.
doesn't have the truthiness quality.
I'm so true. I'm
the truest.
I am the truest. I'm the most trustiest.
Trustiest guy.
I have trust coming out of me. You wouldn't believe. Like you wouldn't believe. Yeah. Beautiful truth. Beautiful. I have truth so high that you can see the truth. You can see the truth from space that I am uttering. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
That's exactly. That's true.
As he put it
I'm the most agreeing.
I'm the agreeing.
You can see my agreeingness from Alpha Centauri. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to throw the floor open to some questions. If anybody has any questions.
But only questions I like, not questions I don't want anyone
please,
disagreeing with anything I've said.
In
Otherwise
writing.
I'll break your legs.
So I don't know if anybody, if we have a microphone we can give to you,
yes,
if you'd like to. Okay, we'll come to you in a sec. Okay.
No, the question I had, I mean, a lot of the political satire films you see, and a lot of the ones in the past, deal with developed countries, and you have a lot of, events, politically speaking, so like in North Africa, for example, where you have these nascent democracies, but there's that facet of religious fundamentalism as well. And we're talking about what we can laugh at in this day and age and what we shouldn't poke fun at. But do you think there would be an potential there for a political satire comedy to treat those kind of issues and make a film, in a developing country?
Oh, absolutely. I'm suddenly remembering when we were at Sundance with the film two or 3 weeks ago, and at the end of the screening, someone came up to me, and she was practically in tears, and she said, I just watched this film, and she said, I'm from Zimbabwe, and this has just happened. This story has just happened. We've had this tyrant in power for 30 years, and then we've had a kind of soft coup, and we've had the police taking on the army. The army taking on the police, actually. And I was thinking about it, I was thinking, absolutely, yes, it's the same. And you find these patterns that they kind of just repeat and repeat and repeat all around the world and all through history. It's ancient Rome, it's who's going to be the next emperor, and it's got to be me, because if it's not me, you'll kill me. So I better be emperor so I can kill you. It's that, and it's interesting that even things like when Yes Minister took off. Yes Minister is still shown regularly in India, because India has a massive bureaucracy. And that causes endless frustration, and so the Indian audience find Yes Minister and its kind of analysis of how that bureaucracy works absolutely in tune with their experience. So absolutely, whether I would make a kind of North African or East African kind of satire, I don't know, but it's certainly there should be no area where a decent comedy about what's going on. I mean, that's then when you test how much freedom of expression there is in the country as well.
Yes, the speaker at the back.
Someone there. Yeah. There. Okay, so we need to get. I think we need to get the mic to you.
When you were developing Veep, how did you discuss with your actors what motivates someone very young to go in this world, which is incredibly crass and venal and aggressive, and which is, particularly in these times, so out in the open that it's a terrible profession? What makes them decide to keep continuing?
What motivates them is power. It really is. I mean, somebody did say to me, there's so much power in Washington. If you can find a desk, a phone, have some contacts, if you just hang around near someone who's powerful, you'll acquire some of that power. And they said, you know, I think there's in the loop, one of the juniors in the State Department starts to take up tennis because he hears that the Undersecretary of State plays tennis. And the thing is, you know, if you get to know them while you're playing tennis, they might invite you to a meeting. And they said, you know, once you're in a meeting, you're in power. If you're in the room, you're in power. And Madeleine Albright, when she was Secretary of State, taught her staff bladder diplomacy, which is basically how to stay in a room for up to 4 or 5 hours without having to go to the bathroom. Because if you went to the bathroom, a decision might be made, and you weren't there. So you weren't involved in that decision. So, and people talked about how they just would loiter near various political figures' offices in the hope that they might catch their eye and invite them to a meeting. So that's what they said, it's power. You can acquire power that way. Yes, no, there was someone up at the back who was going to...
Hi. Firstly, big fan, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Also, Peter. I have a question for both of you, actually, as a maker and as a, if I can say, as an appreciator. And it goes back to what you were saying. It's a bit of a philosophical question in terms of #MeToo and all of that. When I was very young, I had a teacher who was a former Marine, and he told me a story that stuck with me throughout my whole life in terms of how I appreciate art and film and TV and music and so on. And his great-grandmother was a huge fan of Tchaikovsky, and she loved Tchaikovsky, and she played Tchaikovsky on records all the time. And then somebody told her one day that he was gay, and she threw all of his records away immediately, from decades of listening to nothing ever again. And this was very easy for me to frame in my mind because clearly she was wrong. She's a homophobe and she's wrong. But this is much trickier with Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and everything. What they've done is wrong, but I love their work. And so I'm just wondering, do you struggle with that as a maker and as somebody who appreciates the art?
What we're talking about. I mean, Wagner, he was a vicious anti-Semite. And, you know, people still to this day have trouble with Wagner, and it's an issue. I wish I had a kind of very quick, neat, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should listen to that, you shouldn't watch this, you could watch that, you shouldn't watch. I wish I had that, but it's so complex because it's so bound up with your own memories at the time of first watching them and what you felt about them and what it taught you about filmmaking or about comedy. And you know, with Woody Allen, it was sort of both. It was like actually saying that comedy is not a kind of inferior art form to drama. You can make really formally experimental films as comedy films. In fact, comedy allows you, in a way that sometimes drama doesn't, to be more than literal, to jump and to suddenly turn into a cartoon at one point in Annie Hall, and another point they have subtitles running and saying their inner thoughts and so on. And that's what comedy does. It reminds me of like children's fiction is a bit like that. Children's stories are like where they can play about with the form, they can jump. You're allowed to do a bit of magic. Whereas in dramas, everything has to be very kind of, people like it to be very literal and sequential and logically flow. So I genuinely don't know what the answer is. And I also genuinely think it's because we're still working out how big the problem is in the first place, you know, and the only kind of, and it may sound a bit pat, but the only thing I'm sure about is actually the real benefit will be when we start thinking about what happens next rather than what has happened, as in what do we do now to make sure it doesn't happen like this again? You know, are the different guilds, the Writers Guild, the Producers Guild, and the Directors Guild in America, getting down and working out a code of conduct so that there is a way in which you have a meeting with an actress or an actor, you know, who else is in the room? You know, what's the protocol and what's understood to be the protocol, so that never again a director is going to say, why don't you come up to my room and we can talk about the script a little? You know, that sort of thing. Actually define what is acceptable behavior and what isn't acceptable behavior so that it's very, very clear. And no one can, again, say, well, it was just, you know, it was just a relaxed meeting. You know, I don't know what the problem is. You know, well, no, you didn't do it like that, you know. In the same way that in any other workspace, there are protocols by, you know, how you have meetings and so on.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I mean, the thing I would add to that is that we're in danger of fetishizing a kind of constellation of 5 or 6 kind of demonized figures. Wagner, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot. I'm not going to read any poems by convicted rapists anymore, so I'm not going to read the Canterbury Tales ever again. The danger is that we will fetishize half a dozen people and then congratulate ourselves on our free-thinkingness in deciding to forgive them. What I think the Me Too movement is about, and obviously Me Too campaigners might be a little restless, the idea of a couple of middle-aged white guys standing up on stage and lecturing everybody on what Me Too is all about. But it's about something much more widespread than that. It's about practices within the industry generally, and in any other industry. For some reason, we talk about Me Too as if it only applies to show business, and show business people are the only people to be criticized. Apparently, there is no problem in law, in the military, in accountancy, all
politics,
these, or politics. Well, there's a couple of people in politics, but all these other areas of life, apparently, they're fine. You know, that in you know, veterinary surgeon's office, there's no problem at all. It's show business, because show business is the only thing that's important. So we have to worry about that. I think it's much more widespread. It's about practices and bringing women in at every other level. I think that's what I think it's about. Women filmmakers, women, you know, producers. It's a much more broad thing than, as I say, slightly fetishizing brilliant but troubled and hateful individuals, like, you know, as it were, Louis C.K. or something like that. I think it's a more broad subject than that. Yes, I think we're going to get the microphone down to you. There was somebody up here on the aisle, I think, who was slightly quicker. Sorry about that.
So I've got 2 quick questions. On your Twitter feed the other day, you had an email debate between Alan Partridge and Malcolm Tucker.
Malcolm Tucker, yes.
So first question is, are you going to touch Brexit as a subject? I would really like to see something on that.
Well, it was about Brexit, so that was my contribution to that debate. And I think we settled the debate once and for all.
Okay. The second question is, if you look at Yes Minister and The Thick of It, both of which are the best satirical political comedies that have been produced in the UK, Yes Minister was Mrs. Thatcher's favourite television programme. And then if you look at The Thick of It and you look at the way Alistair Campbell responded to that, he hated it, but Mrs. Thatcher loved the satire. What do you think the difference is in terms of the way it was written and the way it was received?
Well, he started by hating it, and then he kind of absorbed it and then said, oh, well, I am Malcolm Tucker. So he kind of... And I do find the identification... I mean, one of the reasons I stopped making The Thick of It was politicians started quoting it in the House of Commons to each other. So, you know, Ed Miliband called the George Osborne's budget the Omnishambles budget, and David Cameron had a go at Jeremy Corbyn saying, you know, it's worse than a rejected script from The Thick of It, what's going on in your department. And once they kind of identify with it as a badge of honor, as like I was saying, in the White House, they were quoting The West Wing at me, I sort of think I'm now uncomfortable with this level of acceptance, because if you'd watched the program carefully, you'd see that the image it's projecting is not one of how things ought to be. And if they don't see that, then it's singularly failed in what it set out to do. And that's not to say that, you know, as I say, we researched by speaking to people in advance to come up with the characters and the type of thing that's... I mean, the most depressing thing that happens in something like The Thick of It or Veep is we invent a story. We invent a stupid, ridiculous story, and it goes out, and then someone from Whitehall or Washington rings up and says, how did you find that out? Because we kept that very, very quiet. So I'm just intrigued as to who mentioned, you know, and then you think, oh, right, it's time to stop now, because... Anyway, yeah. Something like that? Nope. Right.
Somebody on the front. I think somebody in the front. Yes, this gentleman right here.
And then there's someone up there, yeah.
You may just have answered this.
Okay. Right, so the press
well,
over there.
no, just in case. Again, I'm a big fan. I think your work is wonderful and makes me laugh a lot.
Much. Thank you.
But I did wonder, does satire need a vision of the good? Is there a bit of a lack? In any way, The Thick of It and In the Loop and Veep contribute to a kind of cynicism about political life and politics?
All I see is a reaction to what I've seen. That's it. You know, I naturally am a kind of optimist. I tend to be an optimist, but it was my response, and it was an angry response. It was a frustrated response to what I'd seen, and it was prompted, as I said earlier, by the invasion of Iraq. And I just asked myself, how does something like that happen? Because every expert in the land was saying this would be a disaster. The biggest protest the country had ever seen had said this is going to be a disaster. Nobody has voted for this. People in the cabinet didn't actually want it. People in the House of Commons didn't want it. And yet somehow it happened. And it happened because in the UK, if you have a prime minister who has a large majority, they have absolute power. They can do whatever they like. And so I wanted to analyze how power works behind the scenes in the UK. So that was my response. But, if it is cynical, well, I sort of feel I had a lot to be cynical about. But on the other hand, it's not something I want to be doing for the rest of my life, which is why, I've stopped doing The Thick of It, and now I've stopped doing Veep. And, the next thing I'm going to be doing after the death of Stalin is a film of Charles Dickens' David Copperfield, which is a funny, moving. It's about a boy who has a terrible childhood, but then starts mining his childhood for a way of kind of working out how he deals with relationships and the world around him, and uses his imagination. And so it's quite a it's a kind of uplifting and yet fragile and very contemporary kind of themes in it, and that's what I'm doing next. So I'm maybe see that's community service for all the years of punitive satire that I've been kind of foisting on people.
I think you should do the Waltons. I think you should do a feature of the Waltons.
A sweary Waltons.
Yeah, fuck you, John Boy.
Good night, John Boy. Shut the fuck up, Mom. So yes, there was. Where we go now? There's someone had that. Oh, sorry. It'll come eventually.
I think I'm over here. Hi. Hi, big fan also, and I have 2 questions. The first one is a short one. I think, when are we going to see...
that means the second one.
Yeah. When are we going to see the new Alan Partridge? Is there a date?
Oh, I think quite soon. I think in about March or April, I think. I'm not as involved, but I've been popping in and out and seeing them. Yeah.
All right, really.
So now the long second question.
Well, yeah, that's from the perspective of a screenwriter. I'm really interested in the pilot process.
Yes.
I can understand that you conjure up the idea of the Veep as being the main character, but then you have to start building that world before there is a production budget and anything. Is there a big team involved? Are there already writers involved, extra writers, or is it really you?
On the pilot, no, because you've got to keep costs down. So I'll have 2 or 3 writers on the pilot. And really the hard work, I think, goes in assembling the cast. Because that's the cast, if it works, that you're then going to have to feed scripts and characters, for the next who knows how many seasons. So that's the important element. And I remember really when I started off my very first job as a radio producer, a radio drama producer telling me that, if you get the cast right, you've done 90% of your work. And he was absolutely right. It's such a key. So I do the casting process very slowly and one cast at a time, one character at a time. So that as soon as we've cast one, it's now finding who's the actor who best fits that actor. And then we've got those 2 actors. Okay, who's the third actor who best fits those 2? And gradually that way. And just for the nature of the projects, I kind of like to cast actors who are very comfortable about, changing the words and naturalizing the dialogue and going a little bit off script. And I keep telling them, it's not about coming up with lots of funny stuff, because we've got writers, we can do that. It's just about, if I want it to feel real, are you happy to take that line but just make it, say it slightly your own way, to make it feel like you're genuinely coming up with that dialogue then and there. And so the casting process is about finding actors who are happy to do that as well. So that's the key, I think, in the pilot process.
Is there a certain type of actor that you then always come back to, or?
No, it varies. I mean, in The Death of Stalin, there's a variety. There's Simon Russell Beale, who's a classically trained Shakespearean stage actor in the UK. There's Jeffrey Tambor, who's like a American sitcom actor. Steve Buscemi, who does film and television. Michael Palin, who comes from his own kind of background. He's defined by himself and his fellow Pythoners. You know, Andrea Riseborough, who is just a different chameleon, really, a different personality in every film that she does. So I actually like a variety of styles rather than all from one group of people and one generation and so on.
Could I just jump in my own tiny footnote to this?
Yeah.
Part of the things I love about Death of Stalin, I think this is the first time in my lifetime that Simon Russell Beale has genuinely had a movie or a screen role commensurate with his talent as a stage actor. I think he's just been so brilliant on stage.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't, before now, nobody's given him the role that he really deserves. And this is so great, I think.
Well, it was what I kind of wanted him, because I can't remember if I said this earlier, the character he plays, Beria, we don't really know in the West. We don't have an idea. And I like the idea that the actor playing him is something a cinema audience wouldn't really know.
I don't think they do. I think cinema audiences maybe don't know worldwide, but Simon Beale is such an amazing stage actor.
Yeah,
and he's a gigantic stage actor. But really, this is
so
the first time in my lifetime that, I mean, I've grown up with Simon Russell Beale's amazing work on the RSC, and he's an amazing actor.
Yeah.
And this is the first time in my lifetime that he's had, I think, a real fantastic, juicy cinema role. It's so good. It's so
right,
good.
I'll think.
I mean, and Andrea Riseborough, I mean, you must let me go on, but so amazing.
Yeah.
It reminded me, she also played Margaret Thatcher. Really interestingly, she played the young Margaret Thatcher. And interestingly, her performance as Svetlana Stalin, interestingly similar in a way, saying
because of power-crazed.
Sort of power-crazed and slightly glassy-eyed and scary.
So, yes, so there was someone who, yes, there we are, had her hand up over there.
Hi, huge fan, both of you.
Oh, thank you.
And it's a question to both of you. History today has become very important when it comes to cinema. A lot of people, and it's also become like an information mechanism. For example, Hamilton has become like the biggest civics lesson. And the Iron Lady humanized Margaret Thatcher to a lot of people. Taking that and looking at cinema today, it's also become sort of like a youth galvanizer, where a lot of the youth today get information from cinema. So how important is for you as a director to get your facts right? How pressurized do you feel to get your facts right, as opposed to telling a story as you see it? And Peter, you as a writer, as an appreciator, as someone said, how important is it for you to say, he got it right, that's bullshit, I'm going to... but it's a good movie, nevertheless. Watch it without the facts.
Well, I think it's important that we know what is right and what isn't. I think there is always, so if it's based on a real person, I think I think you should have, and you should exercise, and this is part of your responsibility as opposed to your right, as a consumer of the product. It is your responsibility to know a little, as opposed to simply thinking the responsibility is solely that of the creator. For example, there's a movie out now about Phineas T. Barnum called The Greatest Showman, which rather glosses over some of his views on race and all the rest of it. But I think that there should be a creative license there. Yes, I think there should be. And I think you're not making a documentary, basically. It's not a documentary. The there's no rule that says that you have to stick to every syllable of the recorded facts. But yes, I think you have to be alive to where the creativity lies. And I think you have to be alive to that. But yes, it's not billed as a documentary. Armando is not saying, here I am making a documentary about the death of Stalin. It's not a documentary, it's a comedy. No, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think.
There's no subtitle at the beginning saying this is a true story, because it's an entertainment, it's a drama, it's a comedy. For me, though, there was the happy coincidence that the more true it was, the kind of funnier it, I therefore felt actually the more I delved into the reality of it and did a bit more research and found more true incidents and put them in the film, that actually it was a better film for it. So I was very comfortable with it. And the thing that pleases me most is that when Russians see it, they say how authentic it is, how it brings them back to memories of the Soviet Union, or how they suddenly felt that they were there. And so I met a gentleman a couple of weeks back who was 14 when Stalin died, and he lived just outside Moscow, and he walked into Moscow to see the body, and he got carried away up in the crowd disturbances where hundreds of people were killed, and he was caught up in all of that. And he said, no, the film felt real. He said it was funny. He said it was a funny film. I laughed, but it's also true. So for me, but as Peter was saying, it's not about getting a kind of, actually on day one, this is what happened, on day two, this is what happened. It's not about that. And I think actually, when you watch a film and it's a drama, it's a comedy or a drama, I think you're acknowledging that. You are surely thinking, well, what I'm being told now is not necessarily going to be everything exactly as it happened. Because otherwise, what happened was a kind of carefully constructed comedy. And I'm not sure that was the case. What's interesting is a lot of people are getting their facts from comedians who are like journalists now, like John Oliver and the chat show hosts, who have teams of researchers. If Trump is saying, the real news is actually fake news, and if Trump is his own kind of comedian, as it were, the comics are becoming the reporters. They're saying, okay, well, yesterday Donald Trump said this, and 3 weeks ago he said that, and a year ago he did this. And just by placing, facts in a sequence, it becomes funny. I don't know what that's saying about kind of, The Guardian and the mainstream press. Except it's interesting that the mainstream print press, print journalism is now actually setting the news, isn't it? It's doing investigations now. I mean, all the major stories about the Russia thing, about Harvey Weinstein, were all news first unveiled by the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, the Guardian has done,
Well, yes, it's an indication of how, in fact, this is what happens, that the press, the people who have some investment behind them and some commitment to the idea, as you say, of facts which exist independently of ideology, these things can and should be uncovered by what we laughingly call the MSM, the mainstream media, or indeed old-fashioned print journalism, print newspapers. So, yeah, they're not obsolete after all. At least I hope not. Otherwise, I'm out of a job, incidentally. Let's hope not. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that happened in my lifetime is that I thought, this is amazing, Web 2.0, nobody calls it that anymore, but we went through a phase of calling it Web 2.0, will democratize the news, democratize everything, we will all get to know each other and everything like that. In fact, it came very close to being like the Babel fish in Douglas Adams. It came very close to us sort of hating each other, and then us only becoming interested in in an echo chamber of people who already agree with us.
Yes, and a news feed that selects stories that only you are interested in.
Yes, exactly.
You're not going to encounter stories that
exactly. The idea that we would be interested in, let's say, news stories about climate change. We would indeed be relatively well informed about climate change, but about nothing else, because we weren't turning over the pages of an old-fashioned newspaper from one thing to another, saying, "Oh my goodness, look what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. My goodness, what's happening in Yemen? What's happening in Egypt? That sort of thing is not.
I remember reading a story about, I don't know if it's true, as one of these apocryphal things, where they did a sort of scientific thing looking at information and what's the best way to convey information, and that involves not just the ability to kind of source it and follow it through and read it and find the right bit, but be able to transport it. And they sort of came up with this idea of words sort of written on, you know, thin, they called it paper, that and if there was lots of it sort of bound in a kind of thing that you'd call a book. And they sort of they arrived at the book having kind of set themselves the question, you know, is the book obsolete? Okay, what's the best way of, you know, and they kind of arrived at it.
It's very high-tech, a book. It'll keep working when you're in a tunnel as well, on a train. It's very high-tech.
Yeah, although I can see, you know, when it's daylight and stuff, and you know, you've got to turn it up, haven't you, the book? Yeah.
But it doesn't need like a mouse. You can just track it across the page. I think we've got time for one more question. I think we're slightly over time.
One more question.
Yes,
better be amazing
one, because this is the finale. So no pressure.
It's got to be a question that is so amazing that the only answer is silence, followed by applause, and then all the lights going up. So. So while the mic's coming, just think of that question as the mic comes towards. It's this gentleman here.
He's right here.
He's right there. He's got the question. He's got the question.
Speaking of, you mentioned John Oliver. A couple of months back, there was a news story done by a publication where someone, for some reason, reviewed his episode and said he didn't talk about an issue. This was a journalist writing about and saying, I'm disappointed in John Oliver not talking about an issue. Do you think since Brexit and Trump, there has been an overinflated sense of importance on comedy and satire? Because I see columns, I see roundups daily of this is what Colbert said, this is what Seth Meyers said, but no one understands a Colbert monologue is nothing compared to 5 decisions Donald Trump makes in the office. So my question is, what are the responsibilities of a good satirist? And do you think people should know the difference between a comedian and a journalist?
Yes. I mean, I mentioned that a lot of people are getting their news off comedians, but also what I should have gone on to say, and I just forgot to say, is actually that's slightly troubling in that comedians are not our major news source. They're our major joke source, but they're not our major news source. And it's great. I think what John Oliver does is great. And what Seth Meyers and Samantha Bee and you know is amazing. But I remember John Oliver saying, actually, when we were chatting about it, he said to me, I wish I didn't have to talk about Donald Trump every week. I just want to get on about something else. But every week I have to talk about him because he's gone and done something else. You know, it sort of does beg the question then, why aren't we being drawn to reading, as you say, 5 pages or 5 things Donald Trump did this week, which is in Politico, isn't it? It's just 5.
No, what I meant was people take satisfaction from him making fun of Trump, but without understanding that the person still has the power. He's he's taking your taxes.
Well, that then leads to the next depressing thing, which is, and I've always believed this, which is comedy, satire, political comedy, changes nothing. It doesn't change anyone's political views. Peter Cook had that great phrase about how he loved the comedy of sort of 1930s German Weimar cabaret and how it did so much to stop the rise of Hitler. And, you know, the great blooming of political comedy in the UK was in the 1980s, and it saw 3 Thatcher administrations in its turn. So it really doesn't. And actually, if you do want to change stuff, you have to read, you can write journalism, you can campaign, you can demonstrate, you can join a party or a pressure group. You know, that's how and above all, you can vote. That's the main thing, vote. I mean, part of the issue of something like Brexit is a lot of people woke up the next day thinking, oh, I didn't vote because I thought voting doesn't make any difference. Oh, it does. You know, and that's the main thing. And no, what political satire might do is it might help articulate something that you are sort of half thinking about. It might illuminate a subject that you were interested in, but you wanted to know a bit more about. It might pose a kind of opposing argument at you that gives you something to chew on. Above all, it should make you laugh. If it makes you think and it makes you progress to kind of doing something about it, great. But in the end, it's down to you. It's down to you and your vote and the arguments you make in conversation and in debate. You know, we don't argue as much as we used to because we're frightened of argument, and we need to, because otherwise just nothing will change. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen, keep on applauding for Mr. Armando Iannucci.
Mainstream journalism.
Inside the system. Yeah.